What's going on, guys, and welcome back to the channel. Roller coasters are a staple attraction for almost any amusement park, and they're one of those timeless things that really only seem to get better. However, they aren't without their histories, and from time to time we do see accidents, sometimes very bad ones. But before I begin, I do want you all to know that theme parks are very safe, and my goal here isn't to scare anybody. These are just things that have happened in the past, and we should know and learn from them. So without further ado, here are 5 of the worst roller coaster disasters in amusement history. Starting in the United States, our first disaster on this list comes from the once very popular Bells Amusement Park in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where a roller coaster ended up barreling backwards and causing a fatal accident. On April 20th, 1997, visitors of Bells Amusement Park came flocking in after a promise was made that each ride would be just 25 cents that day. As part of a promotional campaign, one of the most popular attractions, the Wildcat, was part of this, and it started to get a long line early that morning. All seemed to be going well, but by mid-afternoon, one of the coaster's cars had reached the top of the lift hill and abruptly stalled. But before anything could be done, it then disengaged and started hurling backwards down to the station below. 45 feet later, that moving car slammed into an idle one, and a 14-year-old boy was ejected to his death. It was certainly horrific, and 6 other people sustained notable injuries. The next week, investigators got on site and determined that the cause of the issue had involved the park replacing parts of the coaster that weren't approved by the Wildcat's manufacturer. A financial settlement was then reached between the park and the victims' families, and Bells ultimately closed in 2006. Disney is known for its family fun, but sometimes even they have their problems. On September 5th, 2003, a 22-year-old man lost his life after the Big Thunder Mountain Railroad derailed at Disneyland. Most of you are likely familiar with the attraction, but if you aren't, Big Thunder Mountain Railroad is actually a roller coaster disguised as a mine train. It takes guests through the American Southwest, and as the ride progresses, riders encounter a number of tunnels and caves that the train interacts with. The train itself consists of 5 cars, as well as a lead locomotive that doesn't seat riders, and on the day of the accident, this lead locomotive caused major problems. As one of the trains entered said tunnels, fasteners on Thunder Mountain's upstop and road wheels were not tightened enough and an axle broke loose. This axle jammed against a brake section, and the aforementioned lead locomotive car jumped, hitting the ceiling of the tunnel. It then fell on top of the passenger car just behind it, crushing 22-year-old Marcelo Torres. Unfortunately, he passed away on impact, and out of respect for him, I won't include any more details here. Still, Disney was ultimately found to be at fault, and settled with the family for a quote undisclosed amount of money. Our next disaster on this list took place in Osaka, Japan, at the now very infamous theme park, Expoland. The disaster caused the death of 1 person and injuries to 19 others. In the early afternoon of May 5th, 2007, 20 people boarded Expoland's stand-up coaster, the Fujin Rahin 2. At over 2 minutes in length, the coaster was more than halfway through its layout when suddenly, disaster struck. A broken wheel axle, which had been dragging since the beginning of the ride, caused the second car to derail and smash into a guardrail. As this happened, the other guests couldn't have known this, but one girl was caught in between and was dragged an additional 900 feet before the coaster finally came to a stop. I will again spare you the gory details, but she was pronounced dead on the scene due to blunt force trauma to the head. Because of this and the culture in Japan, the accident sent shockwaves through the industry. Expoland claimed it didn't have enough workspace to inspect the cars the prior season, and the park was ultimately shut down for good. The Japanese government then required new inspections to be performed across the country on all of its other parks, and many of those places closed permanently thereafter. Rough Riders, originally known as Drop the Dip and later Over the Rockies, was a roller coaster on the Bowery and Jones Walk, known then also as Golden City. Golden City was located in Brooklyn, New York, and it suffered a ton of accidents throughout its lifetime. Most notable, though, was the pair of disasters that took place on Rough Riders in 1910 and 1915 that claimed the lives of 6 different people. The first disaster occurred in 1910 when 17 visitors were ejected from the top of the coaster. At first this might sound absurd, but in the early years of coasters, especially with the switchback railways, there was always a brakeman in the middle or the back of the ride who controlled the speed of it. Unfortunately for the riders of this particular train, a reckless brakeman got the coaster going too fast and it derailed. 3 of the 17 people died as they hit the ground below, and the others received life-threatening injuries. This was definitely a different time though, and despite being problematic, the coaster did continue to operate. That was until more deaths followed. On August 7, 1915, the train once again derailed and jumped the track, killing the brakeman and 2 other passengers in the process, one of which was a 4-year-old boy. It was then decided that the ride should be shut down, and it was ultimately demolished. Our final disaster that I'll include in this list is probably most widely recognized and agreed upon as being the worst disaster in amusement history, and that is the accident that occurred on the Big Dipper at Battersea Park in 1972. Located in London of the UK, Battersea Park was a fun fair that operated from 1951 to 1972 that had boasted 5 coasters in its operational lifetime. Of these, the Big Dipper was the most popular and had been relocated from a prior park leading up to its opening. That decision was one that ultimately ended up claiming the lives of 5 children and injuring 13 others. On the afternoon of May 30th, 1972, a train being pulled to the top of the Big Dipper broke loose from its lift system. Despite safety precautions having been in place, the emergency anti-rollback brake failed, causing the train to roll backwards toward the station. Now, as I mentioned in the previous disaster, this coaster too had a brakeman to regulate speed, and he immediately attempted to slow the ride. However, despite his efforts, the train barreled on until it reached the bottom of the lift. At speed, the back cars jumped the rails and crashed through a barrier, with the other 2 front cars landing on top of them. 5 children immediately lost their lives, and 13 others were severely injured. According to reports, one child who had a sister who died in the accident sustained life-changing injuries herself. Carolyn, who survived the accident, said, quote, "As soon as we started shooting backwards, everything went into slow motion. I turned around and saw the brakeman desperately trying to put the brake on, but it wasn't working. Most of the carriages didn't go around the bend, and one even detached and went off the side through a wooden hoarding. People were groaning and hanging over the edge. It was awful." A later investigation found that 51 faults on the ride had been recorded, and the ride's manager and engineer were put on trial for manslaughter. They were both acquitted later on, but it still stands as one of the worst and most impactful disasters ever to happen in the amusement world. On a good note though, while all these accidents were horrific, safety only continues to improve for amusement parks. No one should have to lose their lives on behalf of such a stupid mistake like the ones listed here, but it is important that we learn from them. So with that said, I hope you all learned something new, and stay tuned for yet another video coming in a couple days as well. Until then, thank you all for being here, and we'll see you all there. See ya.